Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi and Tarkir Dragonstorm is headed our way April 8th here on Arena. And today we are going to take a few minutes to talk about this set from our unique budget perspective. But before we get into all that, my Amazon Prime members, listen up. You have a free Twitch sub burning a hole in your digital pocket every month. And you can use that to support the Stronghold and fuel the creation flames of more budget magic content. It's a quick and easy way to make a difference without spending anything extra. And if you don't already have Amazon Prime, did you know you could get up to 6 months absolutely free? I mean, why would we not check this out? Through the link in the description. I mean, let's face it, Amazon has a lot of resources, but they're not going to use it to make budget-oriented Magic the Gathering content unless you send it my way. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah. Right. All right, so the clans of Tarkir are based on 3 color combinations, in this case better known as the wedges. These are 2 aligned color pairs, meaning that they are next to each other in the circle. And then you add in their shared enemy color for the third. For instance, here we've got red-black as a allied colored pair, and white as their shared enemy. This particular combination on Tarkir is better known as the Mardu clan. And each clan on Tarkir, in its 3-color nature, has its own keyword for this set. For Abzan, or green, white, black, it's Endure. It's a keyword action found on creatures, and it's followed by a number. When the creature enters, you either put X +1/+1 counters on that creature, or create an XX white spirit creature token. And it says here that if the Endure ability resolves while the creature isn't on the battlefield, you simply create the spirit token. So I guess it takes the choice away, and the timing is such that it would just create the spirit token. Next up, we've got the Jeskai clan, or the white, blue, red clan, and their keyword is Flurry, which triggers each time you cast your second spell each turn. It doesn't matter what happened to the first spell, if it resolved, if it was countered, whatever, it still went on the stack. The Flurry ability will resolve before the spell that caused it to trigger. Note that Flurry abilities can trigger only once per turn, and creatures with Flurry abilities have to be on the battlefield in order to see the spell be cast. In other words, if your second spell has a Flurry ability on that creature, that Flurry ability won't resolve, but any others that were on the battlefield to see that spell be cast will. Next up, brought to you by the colors of green, red, and blue, we've got the Teamer clan and their keyword Harmonize. Basically, Harmonize is a graveyard mechanic that allows you to tap a creature to reduce the casting cost of recasting the spell from your graveyard. It will remove that card from your graveyard when you do so and put it into exile. Tapping a creature when casting with Harmonize will reduce the generic portion of the Harmonize cost by that creature's power. And do keep in mind, you can only tap one creature to do this. You will always have to pay the non-generic portions of the Harmonize cost, i.e. anything with a color mana symbol. Next up, the Mardu clan that we mentioned earlier is bringing you Mobilize, which is a triggered ability with a number after it. And when you attack, it creates a 1/1 red warrior creature token that is tapped and attacking. These token creatures will be sacrificed at the beginning of your next end step. So generally speaking, you won't be able to carry them from turn to turn. And last but not least, the Sultai, or the black, green, blue clan, is bringing us the Renew ability. Each of its renewabilities are actually somewhat different, but they are all a graveyard effect. All renewabilities exile the card while renew as part of the activation cost, and all of them can be activated only as a sorcery. All renew effects also involve putting counters on creatures, often +1/+1 counters, but sometimes others. They can have additional effects and exist in a variety, something the Sultai would truly appreciate. Now, all of these multicolored clans makes for a lot of gold cards in this set, and although we haven't seen all the previews just yet, the trend is looking like we're going to have nearly double the usual amount of gold cards in this set. And in order to facilitate that, Wizards of the Coast is reintroducing an old mechanic for this set, and that is hybrid manas. These are mostly going to be found at commons and uncommons, but again, not every card has been previewed at the time of recording. As you can see from Monastery Messenger at common and River Wheel Sweep at uncommon, you can replace any of the color pips with 2 generic mana. So these spells can be cast anywhere from 3 very specific mana through 4, 5, or even 6 generic mana. Value will differ. When it comes to evaluating these multiple casting costs using colorless versus color pips, my suggestion is to evaluate these spells at a casting cost of 4. I think that is going to be probably the most common way we see them cast. And with that in mind, most of the common ones are fair cards, and the uncommons tend to be a little above average, so probably in the limited environments we're going to see these splashed fairly heavily. But as you can see in Jeskai Shrinekeeper, this is not the case with every gold spell in the set. We can still expect some to demand specific mana costs. So now that we've talked about all of the 5 clans of Tarkir, it seems like there's one other relevant group that we need to talk about.
What is it?
Dragon!
So I got a little secret for you about the set name Tarkir Dragonstorm. It's got some dragons. In fact, it is probably the most dragon-oriented set that we have seen during the Arena era. And considering we had a set a few years back called Dungeons and Dragons, that's really saying something. So let's dig into it. Because not only did they put a ton of dragon creatures in this set, we actually got multiple dragon-themed mechanics. The first of which is Omen. No, not like that. So yeah, omens. Wizards put out a brief, quote-unquote, statement about omens and how they work and how they're themed. The idea is that it's a event that kind of lets you know a dragon is coming. But I'm going to be honest with you, that's 4 paragraphs and a lot to read. And if you want to pause it and do that, now would be a good time. Because I'm about to slide over to the next slide and shortcut how this actually works. So this is an actual Omen card, and it looks a lot like an adventure, but it doesn't necessarily work the way an adventure does. But like adventures, there is a sorcery or an instant in the lower left corner, but when that spell is cast and resolves, the entire card shuffles back into your library. Now, of course, when it's in your hand, you can choose to cast the Omen or the creature, which in this set is always going to be a dragon. Choice is totally up to you, but of course, if you cast the creature, it just goes to the battlefield and dies and goes to the graveyard like any creature would. But the cool thing about the Omen is the repeatability. generally have lower casting costs on those, so you can cast them earlier in the game. They shuffle back into your deck as a pseudo form of card advantage, and then when you redraw it, you could cast the Omen again, or you could choose to cast the creature. Pretty simple, right? Now, as you may have already guessed, Omens are going to appear mostly on lower rarity cards and are here to help facilitate the dragon undertone within the limited environment. At common, we have a full 5 card cycle, one of each color. Each one, of course, has that Omen and the dragon capability, and the casting cost of those spells match. In other words, the red dragon also has a red Omen, so on and so forth. When we switch to the uncommon cycle, things change up a little bit, and each dragon has an enemy-colored Omen. Although technically, I believe these spells are still considered monocolor, because when they are in any zone other than your hand, the game mechanics only see the dragon portion of the card. And of course, when it's on the stack, you either have cast the dragon or you've cast the Omen. So again, the game mechanics are only seeing one portion of the card. In fact, the only place and slash mage that can see both sides is you when the card is in your hand, or I guess if you look at your opponent's hand, the same would be true. So I'm not quite sure how things like Commander, Brawl, Color Identity are going to work with these cards. That'll be an interesting thing for us to explore with the first couple of days of the new set. The last bit of dragon flavor at lower rarities is the form of the Dragonstorms themselves, the namesake of the set. Each of these is a enchantment at uncommon. When it comes into play, it does stuff. And later, when you have a dragon come into play, you can bounce this back to your hand with the option to recast it at a later date through the normal means. There's no discount or anything like that. All of these look pretty good, although personally I'm not really in love with the red one. But I think any budget playable dragon themed deck is probably going to feature these relatively heavily. Now, of course, Dragonstorm got a couple of low rarity Dragons Matter cards, but to be honest, even for limited, these cards kind of suck. And we also got some higher rarity dragon themed chase cards, but to be honest, unless Dragon Tribal ends up being the best tribal deck in Standard, there's really better options for most all of this, so I don't know that I'd go burning wildcards on these too quickly. The final dragon mechanic, if you would, is Behold, and it's only really dragon themed because in this set we are beholding dragons. So when you cast a spell, it will give you the option to behold a dragon, which is just fancy magic speak for reveal one from your hand or point to one that you already have in play on the battlefield. When you do so, the spell might get cheaper, it might be enhanced in some way. Whether you do it, the main effects of the spell will always occur. It is simply the extra portion that might be changed. Like when we look at Caustic Exhale here, the casting cost is reduced by 1 colorless mana if you behold a dragon. Otherwise, this spell costs black and 1. In fact, this mechanic is found almost entirely on a common cycle. Caustic Exhale is the black representative on that. And beyond that, we don't see it a lot within this set, but I do think we will see Behold quite a bit over the years in Magic, because in the future they can have us behold anything from a planeswalker, an artifact, an enchantment, any of the tribal creature aspects. The sky's the limit here, and I don't see this not getting used in the future. All in all, I do definitely want there to be, and I think will be, a budget-friendly Dragon Tribal deck, but exactly what that looks like, right now, I couldn't tell you.
Melt the flesh off your bones in the blink of an eye.
Think furnace,
with wings. Flash of light, searing pain, then poof, you're nothing more than a pile of ash.
As we begin to look at individual cards in Dragonstorm, there is one key factor high up on my mind, and well, Lost GT has been my go-to higher rarity equipment for, well, over 2 years now, basically ever since it was printed. And it's going to rotate. For those that maybe aren't keeping track or haven't heard, the exact date is a little hard to nail down because the date that's been announced doesn't really match our current understanding of how the arena calendar works. But it looks like it's going to happen somewhere around the end of July, beginning of August. So Lost GT will no longer be available to us standard players. With Ether Drift's release, we talked about the potentiality of the Ether Spark being, you know, the monstrosity that it is, legendary artifact planeswalker equipment. But the reality is it just hasn't quite lived up to the hype, and most of the time it ends up being a win more card. And if you didn't happen to luck into one of these, whether that's with your mythic ICRs from the Mastery Pass or just randomly opening packs, I wouldn't spend a wild card on the Ether Spark at this point. I just don't think it's quite there. Although it is a lot of fun, I just don't think it's worth the cost of admission. So with that in mind, we're really kind of forced to consider the Dragonfire Blade here from Dragonstorm. It's only a rare, it's a 1 mana, its equip cost of 4 is very high, but the reality is most of the time that's going to be more like an equip cost of 3 or less. Obviously it gives a +2/+2, and hexproof from monocolored, which deals with most removal out there. I mean, let's be honest, most of the removal that people are running is mono black, and we see a little red and green and white and things like that out there, and this deals with all of those. And I just don't know how many multicolored creatures we're going to be putting this on and getting a really significant discount. I think this is one of those that rather than rushing into it, we maybe need to watch and see how not only Dragonstorm affects the current standard, but maybe even wait as long as rotation to see how things fall out. Because until then, Lost GT is still a very viable option. And when it comes to viable options, let's be honest, the Final Fantasy set is bound to bring us some really good equipment, right? I mean, how could they make Final Fantasy and not have at least 2 or 3 pieces of excellent equipment? I mean, the Buster Sword alone has to be at least interesting, and hopefully something's going to be good. Hey guys, as we get started with this budget perspective, let me get you to lean in real close. I got a secret for you. It turns out higher rarity cards are good. Okay, I admit that's not much of a secret. And that's exactly why I'm not going to spend our time talking about all the good rares and mythics. There are plenty of other content creators willing to do that. And since I know that a budget player following our plan is only about 70% likely to have any given rare and only about 50% likely to have any given mythic, with the actual playset statistics going even further down than that very rapidly, I'm just not going to spend our time that way. Okay. Instead, I'm gonna turn our magnifying glass towards those commons and uncommons because, you know, those are cards you're going to have, and I want you to be able to get the most bang for your buck. Before we get away from higher rarity cards entirely, I do want to take just a moment and talk about the 5-card rare land cycle. Yes, these are monocolored lands. They're not going to help you with fixing. But in very much the same way, the Kamigawa lands became very versatile and very staple within Standard, I think these villages are going to do about the same. I think you're going to want at least one of these in your collection, but with as many packs as we're bound to open this season, I'm not really concerned about getting those one-ofs, and I don't think you should be either. But by the end of the season, if you don't have them, they're probably worth a wild card consideration. Ironically, I think the most interesting one is the mono blue Mistrise Village. It comes into play tapped unless you control a mountain or a forest, the enemy aligned land types, if you would, and all of those work that way. And I think this card is probably the least powerful of the cycle within Limited, but potentially the most powerful of the cycle within a standard or constructed environment. And while we're talking about lands, the uncommon tri-land cycle should be a pretty high priority for any budget player. These not only help with your tricolor mana bases for the upcoming few seasons, but can very easily be used in a variety of two-color options as well. Alright, so the first thing we really need to understand is that Tarkir Dragonstorm is a synergy-based set. So cards are powerful based on how they interact with other cards, particularly at lower rarities. Now that's not to say there's no powerful cards in this set, because it's also a gold set, or in this case a three-color set. And gold cards, more often than not, tend to be slightly more powerful in order to justify the fact that they are harder to cast. It's much harder to cast a three-color spell than a two-color spell and some colorless mana, given the same total casting cost. Since we touched on many of the gold uncommons earlier in the video, which are pretty well above average on most cases, let's move on to the monocolor standouts that really have a chance to impact standard, in my opinion. And as we begin this analysis, let me take this opportunity to remind you, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about removal. Removal is generally found at lower rarities, and it is generally good and worth having. Some of these cards for the limited environment will end up being some of the best removal pieces in the format, whether it's now or at some point in the future. But with that having been said, Sunpearl Kirin, 2-mana 2/1 with flash and flying. This goes pretty much in your Pixie pickup deck or any sort of blink strategy that you might be interested in. It allows you to return a target non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. If it was a token, you get to draw a card. So really allows you to rebuy those ETB effects and things of that nature. Going to be a strong contender again for that Pixie pickup style deck. Similarly, blue only had one uncommon that blipped on my radar. That is the 5-mana Constrictor Sage, a 4/4 Snake Wizard. When it ETBs, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Very solid start there. It also has a 3-mana renewability. You exile this card from your graveyard, tap target creature an opponent controls, and put a stun counter on it again. Of course, all renewabilities activate only as a sorcery. I think this maybe has the potential to be an all-star in broader standard, particularly for some budget players. Beyond its great lower rarity removal, black has 3 uncommon creatures that I think are worth talking about. The first is Venerated Stormsinger, a 4-mana 3/3 Orc Cleric. That's right, those of you who started playing Magic because of Lord of the Rings, orcs are back on the menu, baby. This little fella has got Mobilize 1, which means he creates a 1/1 red warrior creature token every time he taps to attack. And whenever this creature or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So yeah, it's a drain cleric ability with a built-in ability to create that sacrificial fodder. In fact, you don't even have to sacrifice a mobilized token. It will sacrifice itself at the end of turn. Next up, we've got Gurmag Rakshasa, and it's 6 mana. And I know that's a lot, but it's also a 5/5 demon. And it wasn't that long ago that mono black demons was a very real deck. And, well, cards like this make it just more and more budget friendly. When you add in the fact that when this creature enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn, and target creature we control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Really a great little ETB trigger there that potentially kills an opponent's creature and boosts yours pre-combat. Seems great. I think this has got a lot of upside and we need to keep an eye on it. And last but certainly not least, the 100 Battle Veteran, a 4 mana zombie. You heard that right. Zombies coming at you. Also a warrior and a 4/2 stat line, which honestly is not great. But as long as there are 3 or more different kinds of counters among creatures you control, this creature gets a +2/+4, making it a 6/6 for those that don't have all the math abilities. You may cast this card from your graveyard. If you do, it enters with a finality counter on it. And, well, that's one of your 3 counters by itself. So a potential 6/6 that we get to cast once from our hand and potentially once from the graveyard. It's pretty nice. And of course, Mono Red is bringing more than just great removal as well. Equilibrium Adept, a 4 mana 2/4 dog monk. Yep, that's right. There's an awful lot of dogs in this set. Maybe that's going to become a relevant creature type sometime over the next 3 years. But at any rate, when this creature enters, exile the top card of your library until end of your next turn. You may play that card. And of course, it has Flurry. When you cast your second spell each turn, this creature gains double strike until end of turn. It maybe doesn't shine quite as bright as some of the black creatures we just looked at, but there is an awful lot of double strike potential there, particularly if you can trigger that Flurry with any regularity. And this season brings a little shakeup to Red's color pie in the form of Sunset Strike Master, a 2 mana 3/1 human monk that taps to add a red mana to your mana pool. It also has a 3 mana tap and sacrifice this creature. It deals 6 damage to target creature with flying. I think that's kind of an incidental thing for Tarkir. The big headline here is that Red is getting back Mana Dorks, and well, this one is a pretty good place to start. But of course, as soon as we see one of these at common rarity, the Sunset Strike Master will probably be less of a headline, but for the moment, it's the best we have. And then there was green, and with that we get in Spirited Vanguard, a 5 mana 3/2, which is not great baseline stats. But whenever this creature enters or attacks, it endures 2, meaning it either gets 2 +1/+1 counters, or it creates a 2/2 white spirit creature token. That's right, that happens when it ETBs as well as every single time it attacks. So this can become a real threat or start flooding your board with additional creatures. And of course, we also have Dragon Brood's Relic, a 2 mana artifact that taps along with an untapped creature you control to add 1 mana of any color. It also has an 8 mana ability, sacrifice this artifact to create a 4/4 dragon creature token named Reliquary Dragon that's all colors. It has flying, lifelink, and when this token enters, it deals 3 damage to any target. And since it has lifelink, it's dealing that 3 damage and gaining you 3 life. We can only activate this Wooburg ability as a sorcery. I'm not 100% sure, but from this mile-high view of the potential budget Dragons deck, this might be a build-around card for it. That's a lot for a 2 mana artifact and gives you a lot of late game potential. And I think the omens within the Dragon deck are going to be a lot about buying time to get to an eventual win con. And More to the point, that deck is looking very Jund from the start, with maybe just splashing some key white or blue cards. But of course, we'll have to see how all of that shakes out as the limited season starts. As we transition into the gold, dollar, and cents part of the budget, there's one key factor that we've really got to take into account, and that, of course, is scheduling. Here we are in the year of our Lord 2025, and Wizards of the Coast is releasing 6 standard release premier sets. 3 of which are going to be Universes Beyond, and 3 of which are going to be more contemporary sets. The interesting thing here, or potentially frightening depending upon how you look at it, if we look at the 2023 release budget year, we had 4 sets, the 2024 had 5, and now here we are at 6. Back in 2023, we could very comfortably look at something like uncommon completion numbers that were going to hit in the high 90 percentile. Well, now with 6 sets, we're projecting to be lucky if we hit 75%. So that means we've got 2 real choices. We either need to accept less, which might be perfectly valid, more on that in a moment, or we've got to grind a little bit more and work a little bit harder at the plan. Now, for those that are willing to accept a little bit less, well, that's perfectly valid. I won't fault you for that. In particular, looking at some of the thematics with highly themed sets like Ether Drift and Edge of Eternities, which, if you don't know, is going to be the space-themed set. And then you've got Universes Beyond, things like Final Fantasy and Spider-Man. It's perfectly reasonable that not every set is going to be for every player. So what you could do is play a little less hard, end up with a little less resources on all 6 sets, or it might be a better choice for you individually to maybe sit out a set or 2 this year if you aren't quite as interested in those themes. Like Spider-Man is not going to be for everybody. I personally am really looking forward to that set. I loved the comic books growing up as a kid. I've loved most of the movies, but to each their own. I won't fault anybody for the decisions that they make. For those that opt to follow the plan and keep their grind right where it is, that means you're going to end up with about an average of 73,000 gold per set. And really, that doesn't feel all that different. And with that 73,000 gold available to you each and every season, that's going to allow you to do about 7 jump-ins on average, 2 quick drafts, buy 45 packs of the current set, or ship some of those to the Foundations packs if you're a very new player. It also puts you in a position to buy a gems deal every season, even though they may not offer it, and also allows you to take advantage of a discounted draft token every season, again, if it's offered. For those of you out there opting to take the current season a little bit lighter, there's still a few minimum sort of things that you want to do, just like that daily play, to make sure you are getting the minimum out of each and every set. The first being doing enough jump-in events to make sure that you can build a deck for that only constructed midweek Magic event. That is generally going to be a minimum of 3. You also want to make sure you are doing a draft event each calendar month so that you're getting your rank rewards. For most sets this season, that's going to be 2. So even if you don't buy any packs, you're still going to get 3 to 4 dozen free packs just by participating in that daily play, even if you aren't buying the Mastery Pass. That is going to give you enough commons and uncommons to get a very good feel for the particular set that is going on. We might need to use some of our wildcards earned during this season to fill in some of the more important blanks for future constructed, but that will pan out over time. Additionally, this will also leave you in a position to take advantage of any of those gem daily deals or draft token daily deals, and allow you to push 50,000 gold into the future season. And of course, for those that are interested in finding their own exact path, the budgeting spreadsheet tool that I use for all of these videos is available over on my Patreon. And of course, I want to take this opportunity to thank my supporting patrons, because being a small content creator comes with big bills. And I just couldn't do everything that I do without their monthly support. Thanks, guys. And of course, if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful in your arena experience, we have a few suggestions for what you could watch next.